Victims of human trafficking pay a horrible price. Natural disasters, civil warfare, and political or ethnic battles often create large populations of internally displaced persons. These victims look to flee their home country and search for a better life elsewhere. Many governments are unable to protect women and children who are kidnapped from their homes, schools, or neighborhoods and are smuggled into these countries. In many cases, the exploitation or trafficking of victims is progressive. A child trafficked into one form of labor may be further abused in another. A brutal reality of the modern-day slave trade is that victims are often bought and sold many times over. Victims forced into sex slavery are often subdued with drugs and suffer extreme violence. Girls that were fooled into believing they would work in carpet factories, hotels, or restaurants have been forced later into the sex industry in foreign countries. Children who initially migrated or were recruited for the hotel and tourism industry often end up trapped in brothels. Victims of trafficking regularly endure brutal conditions that result in physical, sexual, and psychological trauma. This harm suffered, like disease and underdeveloped growth, often permanently excludes trafficking victims from their families and communities. Many also suffer permanent damage to their reproductive organs. Sexually transmitted infections, pelvic inflammatory disease, and HIV or AIDS are frequently the result of forced prostitution. Anxiety, insomnia, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorders are common psychological manifestations among these victims. Unsanitary and crowded living conditions, coupled with poor nutrition, foster a host of adverse health conditions such as scabies, tuberculosis, and other infectious diseases. The most serious abuses are often suffered by children. They are the more easily controlled and forced into domestic service, armed conflict, and other hazardous forms of work. Children may be subjected to progressive exploitation. They are resold several times and are subjected to an array of physical, sexual, and mental abuse scenarios. Trafficking victims miss critical opportunities for social, moral, and spiritual development. Victims are typically smuggled to a location where he or she cannot speak or understand the language, compounding the emotional damage from isolation and domination. The loss of family and community support network renders the victim vulnerable to the trafficker's demands or threats and contributes in several ways to the breakdown of social structures. Ironically, the human capacity to endure unspeakable hardship and deprivation convinces many trapped victims to continue to work, hoping for eventual freedom. According to the United Nations, human trafficking is the third largest criminal enterprise worldwide, generating an estimated $9.5 billion in annual revenue for these organizations. It is one of the most profitable criminal enterprises and is closely connected with money laundering, drug trafficking, document falsification, and human smuggling. Governments in countries where trafficking exists struggle to exercise full control over the national territory, particularly where corruption is prevalent. Bribes paid by traffickers impede many governments' ability to battle corruption from law enforcement. In closing, please help. Report any act of human trafficking to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center at 1-888-373-7888.